I think it'd be embarrassing if the Cubs did it. I think it'd be a joke. They cannot behave in this manner. Welcome into Northside Territory, Foul Territory Network's Cubs podcast. I'm Sahadev Sharma with my partner Patrick Mooney. We're your Cubs beat writers at The Athletic. Patrick, you're back from your trip in Cleveland. It was a bad one for the Cubs. Swept by the best team in baseball, record-wise. Any other time in the season, if it was 2 months ago, I think it'd be less of this like, oh no, what just happened? It would just be like, yeah, that's a really good Cleveland team. The Cubs competed with them for 2 games, had a stinker, 2 tough 1-run losses. At this point in the season, it hurts significantly. You needed to come away from that series with 1 to feel like, okay, things aren't falling apart. They're still in this. They can do this. I still think with the schedule the way it is, they're allowed to have their optimism. They're allowed to hold on to that. Just as I explained last episode, I just feel like the teams directly out of them aren't that much better, if at all better than the Cubs. Bottom line is wins and losses. They didn't get any of those in Cleveland. So it's a bad start to the week. And if they're going to turn it around, it's going to require a really big hot stretch here. Not just like you can't keep winning 2 of 3. It's like time to start sweeping multiple series.
Yeah, I mean, they're just going to have to win at a clip that they have not demonstrated they're capable of yet. And I was, you covered for us last week when I was on vacation. I sort of joked to someone like, oh yeah, watch them like get swept now in Cleveland. Not because it's about me. It's just that I don't really trust this team. Like as soon as they get on a little mini roll, they run into just a better team or everything doesn't line up. And I don't know, walking into the clubhouse after each game, I did not get the sense of like, doom and gloom. And, Craig Counsell sets a daily tone. As you know, it's a pretty professional driven group, but it just hasn't worked. And I think like you can't laugh in their face when they say there's still time left, but like we also don't have to write like, oh, Cubs making a playoff push. Like this hasn't been the greatest National League season ever, but like the Diamondbacks and Padres like had a lot of talent going into the season. They've advanced far into the playoffs more recently than the Cubs, and they added at the deadline, and they're now matching records 69 and 53. And I think you kind of have to take it from a team like the Braves, right? Like I know they're injured, they haven't been playing as well, but the really sustained run of excellence here that I think them just like falling on their faces is probably not realistic either. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens this weekend at Wrigley. Like, do they have another kind of run in them? And if they don't, it's going to be a long September. And I don't think Counsell's anywhere close to being like, yeah, I want to see the kids from Iowa. I think he's still going to play to the final whistle or whatever metaphor you want to use. But just once again, the Cubs didn't look overmatched or outclassed against a very good Guardians team, but they still, got swept out of Cleveland.
Yeah, and I think the real killer here is that Atlanta swept San Francisco in an oddly similar series where 1-run loss, get your butts kicked in the finale. San Francisco needed to win one of those, or the Cubs needed to win one of their games, preferably both, right?
Right.
Losing 3 games to start the week in the wild card chase, that's the killer more than getting swept. It's where you are in the race. St. Louis is in a free fall. The Pirates are out of it now. San Francisco is up and down like the Cubs. And San Francisco and the Cubs are just so remarkably similar in how things are going. And I'm sure the frustrations of the fan base are similar as well. Farhan can hang his hat on that, whatever it was, 107 win season that he had, I guess.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's rough with the Giants. They haven't they tried, at least they tried to get a star. The Cubs haven't really tried to get a star. So
yeah, I guess they're over. Yeah, they've whiffed on stars even more than the Cubs have.
Yeah. The Cubs aren't like
Chicago. I don't know if the Giants have the same appeal at this moment.
Right, exactly. It's that's I look at these standings, I look at these teams, and I'm like, yeah, the Cubs can compete with these teams, but it's August. What is it? It's August 15th. We're halfway through the second to last month of the season. It's really hard to say the Cubs can compete when they're 6 games out in a mediocre wild card chase. I think there's reason to be optimistic down the line. I think that there's no reason to write off 2025 or act like this team is light years away. I also don't think they're a terrible team for 2024. It wasn't going right for various reasons over the start of the season, and they just haven't had that run and they haven't clicked down of late, especially as far as like getting really hot and sustaining that. Like, you cannot have these hiccups when Counsell. I appreciate the way he reacts. I don't fully understand why fans get so upset about like his post game pressers, act like he's like, I guess they just want screaming and yelling or like someone to be pissed off,
someone to break something. Yeah. I mean, it's the town of, Mike Ditka and, very, I understand to an extent, but I get where Counsell's coming from too.
Right. He's kind of got to keep it even keeled. Otherwise, like then the team's like, oh, this guy's panicking. I guess we're lost now.
Yeah, and it would totally come across as phony. And that's what I asked him this week. Like Monday night, walking in to the manager's office there in the visiting clubhouse, like some of it were like leading questions, like, oh, at least you made them work. They had to use Class A, setting up the rest of the series. But it's just like, this is crunch time. You know what I mean? Like, you can't like be pulling at those positives or taking that too seriously. Like, if you're a diehard fan and a true believer, like, go for it. We're not going to tell you like how to fan or, Counsell's job is to set a steady tone. He would come across as totally phony if he just started like blowing people up left and right. And, this players, like, this is their job. They have to manage the roller coaster, as Counsell called it, in their own way. And I think, Nico said this is not like an energy issue. Tyone said it's not an urgency issue. I think it's just more simply like the roster isn't quite good enough, that they kind of ran back an 83-win team and made some adjustments, and they've gotten some surprises, but just has not been that huge organizational push to where they can really enter the middle of the wild card race. And I mean, just mentally, you can add another game back on the standings because they lose so many head-to-head tiebreakers. Like, it's not like if we were here saying, here's how the Cubs make the playoffs, like, we would just be totally disingenuous, right?
Right. You can't talk about it. I mean, they have to be in a different position for us to talk about it. And I wouldn't be shocked if they were in a different position a week from now, just because of their schedule and how things line up. But they're not. Like, until I see it, it's really hard to go there. Like, it felt different on Monday. 3 days later, it feels very different. And that's just how this season has been. And that's how baseball can sometimes be. You looked up Counsell's Brewers teams. A little different when chasing down. I don't think they were in like 3rd or 4th place in the division when they chased down the Cubs those years in 18 and 19. Am I wrong on that?
I think at least one year they were.
And okay.
I was kind of like, kind of giving Counsell a chance to explain, like, is it as easy as he makes it look? Or like, once we leave the room and the doors are closed, is he like, I think I used the phrase stewing, and he sort of chuckled to himself at that one. And, after he gave an answer, I was like, well, in 2018, and he was, that I think for us covering game 163 really stands out in our head. And he's like, yeah, maybe 19 too. And, to me, it sounded like a little bit of a flex. It's hard to tell sometimes, and I didn't want to like follow up, but it did seem like a little bit of a dig at the Cubs. At least that's how I interpreted it. But 2019, I think for both of us felt more like the Cubs just imploding, not to take anything away from the Brewers, like they still did it. Like, so the Brewers get credit for earning the spot. The Cubs felt like they just self-sabotaged and got passed. Whereas 2018, they actually played pretty well that September. I want to say they were maybe like 14-10 that month. Like it was a respectable clip they were winning at. It was just like the Brewers would not lose. And, you know, it's hard to compare different teams from different years, but like there are those crazy years that happen, right?
Yes. No, I remember that vividly, that 18, like them being chased down. It's like, that was also the year where they had like 40 something games and 40 something days, like that crazy stretch because of all the rain and the weird travel. Like the Cubs had plenty of
was it like flying to like DC in the middle of a hurricane? Was that year or that?
Yes, it was insane. It was just insane. And like they had legitimate excuses. Nobody wanted to hear them at the time, but there were legit excuses and they still played relatively well. You're absolutely right. Like I don't remember the record of the Brewers that month, but they chased them down. They didn't mess around. It wasn't like the Cubs collapsed. 18 wasn't a collapse. 19 was a collapse. Again, Brewers did what they needed to do, but Cubs collapsed. We'll never forget the Craig Kimbrell against the Cardinals. That whole series was just like Cubs fans getting punched in the gut, like day after day. That Cardinals series in, I believe it was still early September. But they had
it was mid to late because Nico had come up. I think you were in San Diego when like they were, that September they were, more than solvent and relevant. And then it just the boom boom game that our buddy Paul Sullivan loves referencing, and we do well, just like such a vivid image. And then I think that might also been the series where like Darvish like broke something, like
right. I wasn't there for that. But yes,
center fields, and so that's the thing. Like we haven't really seen that yet or heard about that yet. We're not deep enough into the season, and honestly, I don't think
outside of Colton Brewer.
That's right. That's right. I think he threw a live BP or a bullpen session yesterday.
Yeah, I saw that.
Of the occurrence resurfaces, but it's like the stakes aren't that high anymore. Like you can't lose your mind when you haven't been above 500 since the end of May.
Right. Patrick, there was a little bit of news that our colleague Ken Rosenthal had. Elias Diaz is on waivers, is put on waivers by the Rockies, and the way that works is like any team can pick him up, right? And absorb his salary, which would be like I can't remember what it said in the article, $1 million and a half.
Yeah, 1.5 million.
Yes. So my takeaway from that is like, okay, when I did digging on Elias Diaz in like May, I didn't get a lot of like response. Like the Cubs are like infatuated with this guy, or the Cubs see him as like a very obvious upgrade. His numbers to me looked a little like, like a hot stretch, like a little bit of a lucky hot stretch. His offensive numbers in particular. He's not a great framer. Cannon for an arm. Pete Crow Armstrong can tell you that. He's got like, he can control the running game. Sounds a lot to me like Christian Bethancourt, like controls the running game, doesn't do a ton more behind the plate, can get on a little bit of a hot streak, but the offense isn't really that great. Since May 11th, which I believe includes an injury, an IL stint, he's got a 55 weighted runs created plus. He's at 80 on the season. Like there was a time when this guy was like raking. So he's not like he wouldn't even be an upgrade for $1.5 million. I mean, I just don't see it. And like, I don't think it makes sense for the Cubs. We just spent the first 10 minutes talking about how they're not in the race anymore. Even if they were, I don't think that he makes sense the way he's playing. What's more confusing to me is what the Rockies do this every year. Like the Rockies are the most confusing organization.
Yeah, what are they doing?
Yeah, like the White Sox are thrilled the Rockies exist, so they're not the worst organization in baseball.
Oh man, the White Sox catching strays. I would say, yeah, I'm with you. What we had kind of heard was doubtful. Maybe if this was a couple months ago when he was raking and there was more time in the season and the playoff odds looked differently and the Cubs had not made these changes and Amaya had not started playing better. But interesting name. Not sure if he's really an upgrade though. And when your playoff odds are like 3%, Amaya needs to play. Like, I think, you had that great article about the catching situation moving forward. Like, ideally, he's probably a pretty good backup, but they just want to see more. And Christian has done a good job as the post-Nito placeholder. So I guess things could change, but I wouldn't really be expecting that. I think this does bring up something we've kind of discussed off the air of like, what if they don't take care of business against these bad teams? And like, what if all of a sudden they're like 10 games out or like, 8 under? Would they do an Angel style waiver dump just to save money?
So it would have to happen over the next week to 10 days, essentially, right? Because teams want to pick those players up. I mean, I guess some teams would want to pick, would do it just for September, right? But most of these teams would want them for the playoffs, which means they need to be on the roster by, I think, midnight, August 31st,
I think,
or whatever that
sounds
is.
Right.
So that's one thing. And I'm not ruling that out. It very easily could just fall apart right here. I just don't first of all, what the Angels did last year was a bad look, right? It's a really bad look you're doing it. They got 30,000, I believe, under the threshold. Just an amazing job. And some of that was Max Stassi staying home and not being paid because his child was born prematurely. And so he stayed home with the child. So just $30,000 and they stay under the threshold. At the time, I remember, was there a concern that this is going to happen? Like, this is going to become a trend? I wasn't that concerned about it. I didn't think it'd be a trend. I think it'd be embarrassing if the Cubs did it. I think it'd be a joke. They cannot behave in this manner. If you're giving away players just to get under the tax, then you ran things poorly at the deadline. That's what it tells me. The Rockies should have traded Diaz for something if they were willing to give him up for nothing. It doesn't who are they doing this to? It'd be like Neris, Smiley. You do that to those types of players too, unless they want to go to a playoff team. It's really disrespectful. It's like it doesn't play well in clubhouses. I just think I don't think that's a good move. I don't expect them to do it. I don't think it's something that Jed and Carter would do. If they did, I think the Angels and the Rockies are not organizations that are thought highly of. They're just not organizations that players are like, I want to go play for those teams. If the Cubs start behaving in this manner, that'd be really unfortunate, and I think it would be eye-opening, and I think the league would have to start thinking about how things are being run in general, and closing some of these loopholes or something like that, because I wouldn't like the direction of that for baseball in general, and I think it'd be unacceptable for the Cubs.
Yeah, I think it would be a joke, but I'm not gonna rule it out at this point. I talked to Matt Moore, the Angels lefty, when he was at Wrigley earlier this summer, and he was like, "Yeah, I was kind of surprised there wasn't more blowback." He's like, "It just seems like there's kind of less shame with stuff like that." I mean, he decided to come back to the Angels, so clearly it's not like he was wounded to that degree, but. Yeah, I just feel like it's such a copycat business. Owners love saving money. The Rockies are weird, but let's take another week off the calendar, see where things are at. No, I'm not expecting that to happen immediately, but I think we definitely have to keep it on our radar, because I do think that would be extremely telling and very short-sighted, but I don't know if you can get under or you can save some money. Like, that's just how these brutally efficient front offices work.
I'll say this. If they are over, if they're, 500,000, whatever it is, that we all know the public numbers are a little off. So they could be a little bit over. You don't want to be over in a lost season. Certainly not 500, 1 million, 2 million over. It'd be a bad look if they were over, barely over. So I can see that. I think so. Either way, it would be a bad look, right? If they're over and they end the season over attack,
correct.
And they miss out of the playoffs 6, 7, 8 games, that's a really bad look. That's stupid. That's money mismanagement. But then there's also the argument that, okay, you had offers, right? There were talks about maybe when Jed was talking about this, he was talking about someone that would be available beyond 2024, right? So we don't know the names. He could have been talking about Jamison Tyone, and he was only getting low A offers for him, but perhaps they were talented guys, but he wasn't getting what he wanted. If he had offers for Drew Smyly and Hector Neris, and now he's willing to do this again, we're talking speculation right now. I'm not talking about things that I know are happening. Just saying, if he had offers for them and now he's giving them away for free, that's a bad look. We could debate about what's worse, being barely over the tax or giving players away when you're the Chicago Cubs. I agree with you. It is a copycat league. I agree. We can't rule it out. I just think it's a bad look. I just think it's the type of thing that makes me think, like, what were you guys doing in July then? Like, what was going on? Like, what and how, like, were you prepared for this, and were you willing for the blowback? And when you talk about how Matt Moore says that, like, I think you're right. Like, I guess that ultimately maybe there just wasn't enough blowback. Like there's some public frustration with it, and ultimately we just all move on.
Systemic rule changes.
Right. So maybe, I think if teams like the Cubs start doing it, though, then that's when it should open eyes. That's when it should raise some red flags. And then we need to start, like, as media, we need to push on it too, and start asking Manfred, like, what big market teams are doing this nonsense. Like, it seems just like ridiculous. Like, what, like, gaming the system and giving players away. It also, like, it didn't end up impacting I think that was the big thing. People were like, you're giving players away for free and impacting races. It didn't end up doing that as expected, because Cleveland picked, like, everyone up. Remember?
Yeah, they grabbed a bunch, and Moore wound up with the Marlins. And he was like, it was cool. Weird. Yeah. He's like, it was cool to be part of the, champagne celebration. But he's like, I knew I couldn't play in the playoffs. And I don't know how much he was joking or not, but he felt like they needed the seat on the plane, and he just didn't want to be in the way. So he just kind of went home after the end of the season. And so I don't know. I'm not going to get too worked up about it until something actually happens. Yeah. But I think it's good to talk it through and think about it, because you're right. Like, the Angels and Rockies just do weird stuff. The White Sox are the White Sox, but if the Cubs do it, or if the Cubs notice a couple other more reputable teams do it, then that would be something to write about for sure.
Right. And if it's one player that you're not using as much, but
they'll say, we need the 40-man spot, we're creating an opportunity for some guy.
Like,
and that maybe could be truthful,
Right. I mean, the Neely kid is going to need to come up eventually and needs a 40-man spot. So I get it. Like, there could be one player that it makes sense for. I just think like if you're doing it with a bunch of players, you're the Chicago Cubs, it's kind of lame. And I just don't think it should be done. But hey, like I whatever you can do to save money, I guess that's the thought process, and maybe it happens. Ultimately, like, the Cubs are in this spot where we have to even discuss this. It's a shame, right? Like, it's ridiculous that it's gotten here. A good weekend, and maybe we shift tone. like a fortuitous weekend. Like, we'll see what happens this weekend. They need to get hot. They need to play well. I thought they played well for about 1.5-ish games, 2-ish games in Cleveland. I didn't think they played well against the White Sox, and they won. So Toronto's not a good team. They have a superstar and not much else beyond that playing well right now. But Vlad Jr. is going to be tough to get out. We'll see how Wrigley's playing this weekend. They got their 2 best starters going Saturday and Sunday. Kyle Hendricks going Friday. They have a chance. They have a chance to get hot again. They're playing a bunch of bad teams. We'll see where they are on Monday. We'll be back at it. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review to Northside Territory. Subscribe on YouTube, please. And subscribe to The Athletic. We will be covering this up and down season the rest of the way. Make sure to read Patrick and my work there. We appreciate all our listeners. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Take care.